When disaster strikes and you aren't there to save your reef, will it survive? Don't get caught with your reefing pants down. Welcome to Potomac Reef, my journey juggling our 180-gallon reef aquarium with family, work, and travel. This episode will cover preparing for travel and catastrophe as they seem to happen together. As they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a gallon of cure. Redundancy and travel friendliness. Part of having a reef tank that can handle you being away from it for periods of time is advanced planning to avoid or manage disasters. I've found that a very pessimistic perspective when looking at the tank is really helpful. Murphy's Law prevails. If it can go wrong, it likely will, and at the most inopportune time. So think about it beforehand. I've spent years fighting with tanks, having some successes and plenty of failures to inform my current practices. My successes and failures have taught me the importance of thinking this stuff through in advance and preparing for it, so that when something goes wrong, the impact is less and it will be easier to handle. You don't want to be scrambling on a holiday morning when stores are closed looking for some sort of replacement pump. Home Depot does sell pond pumps that work in a pinch, but I digress. I like to break down issues into 3 families of problems to make sure I'm thinking about handling them the right way. Severe. Immediate harm to tank, house, animals, and aquarist when discovered. Timeline measured in minutes or hours. Serious, long-term concern, but no immediate emergency. Needs to be resolved within hours or days. Routine. Notification of action needed. No emergency. This is more of an alert. It's important to remember that these categories are not about the level of stress of having something not perfect in your tank, like a carbon reactor offline. Severe means water on the floor, no flow, etc. Apollo 13 severe. I also think about when an issue happens, how will I know? What notifications will I get? Then, how will the tank system handle the problem without me? How will it self-heal? Additionally, what will I need to do to further resolve the situation? When I get home or over the phone or internet? And last but not least, what could I have done to prevent the problem in the first place so that I can go do it before the problem arises? Apex provides the fallback command to tell outlets what to do in case of catastrophe. As you consider each piece of gear connected to an actual outlet, make sure you think about how you want it to behave if you lose your Apex. Rollout. While a million things can go wrong and need to be considered, I always start with the 4 highly critical areas of power, flow, temperature, and flooding. Power gives life. It's the most important as it has the broadest repercussions. It affects everything else we're talking about, so making sure you have a plan here can cover you in other areas. The power will go out, it's a certainty. Whether from a big storm, a squirrel dancing on the power lines, or from an overly aggressive vacuum or hairdryer. At some point, you will lose power. It's no fun fighting a life or death battle without power while your neighbors watch the Super Bowl across the street. Yup, that happened. How will you know, and what will you do? In a previous life, during a hurricane, I went to West Marine and bought bilge pumps and a deep cycle battery to keep water moving. That was a mess and expensive, but it worked and everyone made it through the storm. That triggered me to get a portable generator, extension cords through the house, loud noise outside, and figuring out how to get the fridge out so it too could get power were not fun. Also not fun was figuring out how to hack into my furnace so that I could give it power to the controls so it could run and keep us warm too. My current situation is a 20 kilowatt natural gas powered standby generator. Expensive, but it allows for the whole house to make it through and still have popcorn and movies. Check. Other ideas commonly employed include computer UPS devices, DC battery power sources for Vortex, and battery powered air pumps. Remember, backup batteries don't help if they aren't fresh and fully charged. Flow. Assuming you have dealt with a loss of power situation, your next worry is water flow, both main return and recirc pumps. Losing your main pump is a bit like Apollo 13. All your sump equipment is now disconnected and you're relying solely on your in-tank pumps to get you through. You can survive, but it's pretty stressful. A popular approach is now to run 2 pumps in parallel. I don't really have room for that, nor the flexibility to cleanly route another return line. So if my main pump goes down, it's down. But it's well monitored, frequently cleaned, and I have a spare in the closet. Similarly, losing a recirc pump is generally not a catastrophe if you're running more than one. Either having a spare on hand or a source you can get to reasonably quickly is good enough. But how will you know if it goes down? For both of these types of pumps, fallback settings should be on. Power monitoring, flow sensors, sump level alarms can tell you something is amiss. The best prevention for pump problems is frequent cleaning. Often kind of a pain in the butt, but it's a lot less hassle than dealing with a failed pump during a trip. I think that this is more of an issue in the tank's first year of life. Lots more dynamic biology going on to foul things. But then there are snails and anemones. Schedule cleaning via Apex. Temperature. Extreme temperature fluctuations, either up or down, can have a catastrophic effect on the tank, with prevailing wisdom that hotter is worse than colder. For people who live in four-season climates, our AC units and furnaces are key parts of keeping temperature in line. Since they are not reef equipment, they're often overlooked. I think it's critical to treat them with the same respect that we treat our other gear, and make sure they're routinely serviced to stay in reliable operation. You can even schedule it in your Apex. Having serviced functional HVAC equipment is great, but doesn't matter if your artificially intelligent thermostat turns them off. Make sure that you are familiar with the standby, away, and eco modes that your thermostat might have. Additionally, adding an ambient room temperature probe on an Apex lets you see and react to what's happening in the room. Both PM1 and PM2 modules let you connect another temperature probe. Heaters are an important part of most tanks. BRS has a long but thorough video on this topic that you can check out. I've put a link in the description. I currently run a 100 watt and 200 watt pair of heaters and plan to swap them out in alternating fashion every 2 years or so. My next cycle will replace the 100 watt with another 200 watt so that I'll have 400 total watts of heat. Fallback should be on if you want your heater thermostats to control temperature if you lose Apex. Other things to consider around temperature are open doors and windows. Teenagers and dogs can open or leave open doors that can be problematic. Can you see when the teenager came home in this temperature chart? Fortunately, I had enough heater wattage to keep the tank safe. Flooding. Flooding is the last family of disasters to contend with. While implementing an auto water change system can greatly reduce the likelihood of getting water on the floor, we are really talking about things breaking and spilling here. Reliability is enhanced by using good equipment and not taking shortcuts. Good plumbing. Fittings that actually fit. Hose clamps that work. Firmly mounted equipment. Good enough is not good enough for me anymore. I've given up trying to save money in this hobby. I just have too much invested in it and in our home to risk it to save $30. A leak sensor, or several, are great at detecting problems. I have one under the tank connected to the Apex, and both an Apex sensor and water bug standalone unit in my basement by my mixing station. If I get a leak by the tank, the Apex will shut off the main pump, the skimmer, the ATO, the auto water change system, and my reactor pump. It will leave the circulation pumps running in the tank. I also have it rigged to activate a loud sounder unit to get people's attention. A leak by my mixing station will shut down the RO unit. I also have high and low sump alarms integrated into my system to help detect issues. Remember, once water gets out, before it gets to your hardwood floor, it will search long and hard for any electrical equipment to damage. Put drip loops on cords and make sure that you can't accidentally send water rolling down into your electrical equipment. As I say this, I realize I have a bunch of power bricks that could be better protected. More to do. I've gone through this process for the rest of the equipment on the tank as well. RO units can put a lot of water on the floor. Dosing equipment can nuke your tank. Poorly mounted gear can fall into the sump, creating all sorts of problems. Resist the temptation to place things. Make sure that you mount them instead. Double stick tape and Velcro with tape fails easily. Make things secure. Eye in the sky. Another really helpful thing to have are eyeballs on the tank. Having cameras to be able to see macro issues is a plus. Water levels, bubbles, fish swimming, tank clarity can all tell you a lot. There are many good options. I use a Nest camera and a FOSCAM movable camera in the ceiling. They serve double duty for teenager monitoring. Try and make sure your cameras can't get disturbed. Also, the audio can be useful to be able to confirm that things are working. I was out of town when my main pump partly failed, and being able to see a slightly low tank water level gave me enough info to conclude what was going on. Comms check. Think about how your Apex or other devices get their communications out of your house. For me, it's through multiple access points, my FiOS router, and then my FiOS control box. All have to have power for full communications. I also have my Apex hardwired to bypass the access points, so if I lose them, I'm still online, hopefully. I put a small UPS on my FiOS router and FiOS control box. This should be enough to keep communications up while the generator kicks in. Think about where your choke points are and where the weakest link is. Tank sitting. Who's your go-to while you're away? Often, it's a family member or the kid down the street. Other options include professional pet sitters, friends, or a local fish shop that offers tank sitting services. Of course, if you're in a maintenance program, this may not be a concern, but that's not how I roll. I use my family for work trips and one of our dog walkers that I've trained when we're out of town as a family. A tank sitter is $20 a day, which is probably more than some other options, cheaper than a maintenance contract or an LFS option, and a whole lot less than a catastrophe. So far, so good. Pre-launch. The last step in preparing for catastrophe is thinking about what you will do and what will need to happen when something does go wrong. Remember, it's a virtual guarantee that you'll be in another location, and you'll be talking a non-reefer through whatever open heart reef surgery is required. So, have you written down clear instructions? Where are your spares? Are they labeled? Are things either easy to describe or clearly labeled under the tank? Is cabling set up so that things can be easily replaced, mainly high probability things like pumps? Have you saved your Apex program in case disaster strikes and you have to reload it? Launch sequence and liftoff. Okay, you're ready to go on a trip and leave your tank for a while. Don't make last-minute changes to things. Go into a trip in complete steady state. I got the Alcatronic a few days before leaving for a 10-day Christmas vacation. I did set it up, but I didn't set up its dosing feature. I figured, correctly, that it would take some getting used to, and I didn't want it dosing alk while it was new and unproven and I was on the other side of the world. I used my already established Apex to adjust dosing, which worked fine. Make sure dosing containers are topped off, feeders are loaded, a visual check of the tank has it looking good. Print out those instructions. Make sure cameras are working, and point it at the tank. Not helpful if it's looking out the window because somebody bumped it. Is your tank sitter lined up? Houston, we have a problem. So you have done all your homework, and you are prepared. When something does go wrong, stay calm. This can be hard when you have family members upset, alarms going off, and you're somewhere else. 2 key principles learned the hard way. Stop catastrophe, and don't make it worse. Stop catastrophe. Assess the situation, then take action only if necessary. If water's coming out, stop it. If sparks are flying, cut power. Hopefully, your tank has taken care of this for you, by stopping an overflowing skimmer, for instance. Don't make it worse. Once things are stable and catastrophe is averted or is no longer happening, be very, very careful if you're out of town before making corrective action changes. My bad example. I had an alarm go off while flying across the country and couldn't access Fusion to handle it. My family was raising hell about the noise. I told my son to just unplug the display from the Apex head unit. No problem, alarm silenced. Then I made my mistake. Once I got back into comms and dealt with a minor alarm situation, I asked my son to plug the display back in. I asked a 13-year-old to plug in a cable. Very simple. They do this 20 times a day. However, because it's hard to see what you're plugging into, he managed to plug it into a VDM port instead. Of course, he couldn't tell what had happened and went merrily on his way. Not only didn't this make the display work, but it killed the Apex. Holy crap. This was my major mistake. I didn't need to have the display plugged back in and should have left it until I got home. A little while later, I got the Apex heartbeat alarm and called home and eventually figured out what had happened. As they say, there's no education in the second kick of a mule. I made a good decision and let the fallback settings run the tank until I got home, despite many offers of assistance. My wife kindly went and found an LFS that had an Apex head unit, and I spent the first few hours once I got home rebuilding my Apex. The tank made it through re-entry safely. A better example of how to do this right. My core got fouled while I was away. It didn't alarm, but was showing issues in Fusion. It was running at a couple of %, and using my cameras, I could see that the water level was slightly low. Once I figured out what was happening, I let it be until I got home. I had water flowing, had recirc pumps in the tank, and didn't want to make it worse. I resisted the offers of family members to replace it. I cleaned it when I got home, and all was well. If I had tried to have someone replace it or clean it, we could have had bigger issues. But had I been on an extended trip, I might have had to do it. What's hot? So far, things have gone pretty well. Thrilled to have a standby generator. When I have had issues, I've been pretty prepared. What's not? I'd like to be able to have redundant parallel pumps, but the Red Sea Max isn't quite set up for that. I've learned some good lessons. and now I have a spare Apex head sitting in the closet. Anyone want to buy it? Overall score, 6, 1, and 2. I've gotten through a number of failures that could have been catastrophic with no losses, and have prevented countless others. But I did blow up an Apex and spilled some skimmer water on the floor, despite several layers of protection. That's it for this episode of Potomac Reef. I've covered a number of topics that warrant more discussion. Please post comments with your thoughts and ideas. Next up, who knows? Thanks for watching. Click like if you enjoyed this. Please subscribe, and happy reefing.